If you look at the release dates of games in the Half-Life series, you may notice the big gap between Half-Life 2 Episode 2 and Half-Life Alyx. Surely Valve wouldn't have abandoned the Half-Life series for 13 years, and they didn't. Several projects were worked on during that time, and not all of them saw the light of day. In this video I'll be talking about these cancelled projects, as well as some other cancelled Half-Life games from outside this time period. Hostile Takeover was meant to be an expansion pack to the original Half-Life and follow up Opposing Force, which released in November 1999. It actually started being developed before Opposing Force was even out yet, and was being developed by 2015 Incorporated, who is best known for developing Medal of Honor Allied Assault. While every other Half-Life expansion takes place at Black Mesa, Hostile Takeover would have instead taken place in a different location called Allied Processing, which is basically just a support facility for Black Mesa. Hostile Takeover was originally going to be set in Black Mesa, but this changed about halfway through development. This new facility would have featured underground portals, which were used to conduct mining operations on Zen. This game was centered around the G-Man testing potential candidates for something. The protagonist of the game was described as a new suit type character, which series writer Mark Laidlaw described as a junior G-Man. This game was meant to feature some characters from Team Fortress, most probably Team Fortress Classic, which is a mod for Half-Life. They were going to accompany the protagonist as allies and sidekicks, and were hired by Allied Processing to guard and defend the facility's mining operations. The game began with the player alone in the depths of the facility, who would then try to make their way to the surface to escape Allied Processing before the government confiscates the facility's contents due to the Black Mesa incident. It had a planned release date of late August 2000, however it was cancelled that same month and its trademark expired on the 3rd of October 2004 after several extensions. Hostile Takeover was said to be about 60% done and only 90 days away from completion before being cancelled, and was actually almost entirely playable all the way through. I feel like Hostile Takeover isn't really a great name for this expansion, as it's kind of vague, and every other expansion, plus the original game, are named after various physics terms. I think this name was most likely a placeholder, as a Hostile Takeover happens in every expansion as well as the main game. This cancelled port is unrelated to the Mac OS X version that released in 2013 and was announced in April 1999. It was designed with cross-platform capabilities in mind, which would have allowed Mac users to play with PC users online. It's unknown whether this version of the game would have supported mods like the PC version, and it was cancelled in October 1999, 3 weeks away from its completion, due to it being believed that it wouldn't sell many copies. A second attempt at this port was considered several years later, but was rejected again. While Half-Life is most known for being a PC game, it also released on the PlayStation 2 in 2001. However, the PS2 wasn't the only console considered for a Half-Life port, so was the Sega Dreamcast. It was announced in February 2000 and was to feature a new expansion titled Blue Shift. However, once this port was cancelled, the development of Blue Shift moved over to the PC and eventually released in June 2001. The Dreamcast port of Half-Life would have featured a second disc that contained an online multiplayer mode, which would have featured Half-Life's Deathmatch mode, Opposing Forces Deathmatch and Capture the Flag modes, Team Fortress Classic, Counter-Strike, and at least one popular multiplayer mod. After that last point, it's kinda unsurprising that this port was delayed numerous times, as it was criticised for its low and inconsistent frame rate, long load times, and no online play. Half-Life's Dreamcast port was officially cancelled in June 2001, 3 days after Blue Shift released on the PC due to changing market conditions. Various development builds have been leaked since its cancellation, some of them pretty far into development. Even if Half-Life released on the Dreamcast, it probably would have been weird to control since the Dreamcast controller only has one analog stick. And also, this port would have included higher definition models from the main game. I'm really not sure why every version of Half-Life has to have different models. I mean, I know it's because like the hardware is different and can support better models, but why'd it have to be different for every version? After the PS2 port of Half-Life, Gearbox considered bringing the game to the Nintendo GameCube as well. It started development in early 2002, and the lead engineer of the game was a guy who had worked on the cancelled Dreamcast port. This version of the game didn't get very far into development, as Gearbox believed the port wouldn't be profitable. In May 2006, Valve announced a trilogy of games that would continue the story of Half-Life 2, which had released in 2004. Episode 1 released in June 2006, followed by Episode 2 in October 2007. Episode 3 was announced for Christmas 2007, but the date came and went, and still no sight of the game. Episode 3 would have picked up where Episode 2 left off, with Eli Vance's death, and Gordon and Alex planning to travel to the Arctic to rescue Judith Mossman and destroy the Borealis before it could be used by the Combine. Valve eventually abandoned Episode 3 due to Valve wanting wanting to create more ambitious games, and they started developing a new engine, Source 2, and wanted to delay development of the game until it was complete, and it's still not out. In 2017, series writer Mark Laidlaw released a story on his website that appeared to be a summary of Episode 3's storyline titled Epistle 3. However, Laidlaw has since stated that he regrets writing the story and it's merely a fanfic and a snapshot of a dream he once had. Epistle 3 was removed from his site around May 2022, however copies of it can still be found online. This Half-Life 2 episode was being developed by Junction Point Studios in late 2005, and would have shown how Ravenholm became the town scene in Half-Life 2, infested with headcrabs and zombies. Episode 4 didn't get far enough into development for a proper story to form, and it was only worked on for about a year before Valve lost interest and Junction Point got acquired by Disney to develop Epic Mickey in 2007. This project was later turned into In 2007 or 2008, Valve gave the Episode 4 project to Arcane Studios, who developed it into a standalone game with the working title Ravenholm, which has also been referred to as Return to Ravenholm. It was to take place between Half-Life 2 and Episode 2. The protagonist of this game would have been Adrian Shepard from Opposing Force, however it's unknown how and why he was released from the G-Man stasis. This game would have featured Father Grigori from Half-Life 2, who would have mutated throughout the game due to being injected with headcrab blood in an effort to build up an immunity. Adrian and Grigori would have spent the game travelling out of an abandoned city and back towards Ravenholm. The gameplay appears to be largely focused on electricity, with this feature being used in puzzles and combat. Horror was to be a big theme of Ravenholm, which makes sense, and it was to feature new enemies and weapons. Arcane developers have declined to explain the game's ultimate ending, although it might have included a mutated monster like Grigori. Ravenholm was cancelled with about a year left of development, as Valve felt the project was too expensive and creatively constrained, much to the dismay of its developers who were extremely emotionally invested in the project. Borealis was a VR game in development in 2015 set aboard the Borealis. Players would explore the vessel as it travelled backwards and forwards through time between the 7-hour war and sometime shortly after Episode 2. A fishing minigame was proposed for this game, however, Borealis never gained enough momentum at Valve, so it was cancelled. This game was going to use the new Source 2 engine. Due to this game being VR and using the Source 2 engine, I feel like this could have been recycled into Half-Life Alyx, but I don't even think the Borealis was even mentioned in that game. Now the one you've all been waiting for. Half-Life 3 was in development between 2013 and 2014 using the then in development Source 2 engine. It was planned to use procedurally generated levels similar to Left 4 Dead, so the game would generate different routes through the environment each time it was played. However, Half-Life 3 was cancelled early in development due to the Source 2 engine being unfinished. I find that kind of weird though, as Half-Life 1 and 2 were being developed alongside their engines, so maybe Valve intended Source 2 to be a more generalised engine than Gold Source and Source, as each Gold Source game is basically just a mod of Half-Life, and each Source game is basically just a mod of Half-Life 2, especially the early titles using those engines. This game is likely to be made for flat monitors rather than VR like Half-Life Alyx. This title is likely to replace Half-Life 2 Episode 3 and follow up on Half-Life Alyx's ending, where Alyx saves Eli from dying and gets put in stasis by the G-Man. In August of this year, a video game voice actor posted a credit on their website for a Valve game titled Project White Sands, which was removed shortly after. The White Sands missile range is in New Mexico, which is where the first Half-Life game is set. There's been some other leaks lately that hint towards the new Half-Life project as well. At this point, I kinda doubt Half-Life 3 will use the Source 2 engine since they came out like a decade ago, and hopefully this game isn't actually cancelled, just postponed.